Three things are generally needed. Generally needed. It can be a stylistic choice not to do these three things, but three things are generally needed in a scene: action, narrative, and dialogue. I've done a video where I explain my writing process, but that's mainly for the series as a whole and not necessarily how I draft a book. And I'm currently working on book 6 and book 7 of Thorn's Brew together. And I'm working on chapter 1 of book 7 right now. And because I have drafted half of book 6, there are elements that need to be in chapter 1 of book 7. But the very first paragraph, is what popped into my head when I was getting into this character. And that first paragraph was, now I will tell you that draft 1 is about 600 words. It's not that long. It is completely narrative. It is completely the MC's history. And there was nowhere to go from there. But draft 1 helped me figure out who he was and what his personality is like, how he feels about things, and how he'd been damaged by certain traumatic events in his life. But here's an example of the drafting process of a paragraph. So, draft 1 begins like this. In the summer of '86, I was bored. Living so long meant changing things up every few years, and after a couple of centuries, I'd run out of options. My brother Aaron stuck to one job, bartender for Chase Monroe at Oracle Bar in Somerset. I would have too if fate had blessed me with a mate like Chase, or just a mate, period, a boyfriend, human to spend 40 years of my life with, anything but being alone, and I was. It's all narrative. We have the white room. We don't know where we are. The setting has not been established yet. And because I've written a good chunk of book 6, I know where we are. Because Aaron now works at Strokes in Monroe. The bar is owned by Ben Rain. So therefore, we have to be in Monroe, and we have to be in Aaron's apartment. Because we can't start in 1986. That does not work with what's going on in this book. And right now I'm giving you my narrative. These are the thoughts that go through my head when I am drafting a chapter. There are all these things that I already know, things that are set in stone from one book, and they have to go in the next book, and they have to match. It has to be canon. So, draft 2. It had been 39 years since my brother and I shared a space. One room had replaced 2, and the walls were brick instead of sheetrock. But Aaron's scent clung to every surface. I stood in the middle of the 20-foot by 20-foot room and closed my eyes. Remembering then was better than now. Then I had the promise of something new. Now the invitation from the keeper of the bloodlines kept my coat too stiff on my left side, desperate for my attention, but I ignored it. In the summer of '86, I was bored. So now the first paragraph has become the second in draft 2. I've given you a setting, somewhat. There are things still missing. But I've given you the inciting incident, the invitation from the keeper of the bloodlines. So the question now is, where are we? besides this apartment. Draft 3 ended up like this. It had been 39 years since my brother and I shared a space. Then he lived in a fancy apartment with modern appliances. Now he lived in a flat above the bookstore in Monroe. And the building was 400 years old if it was a day. Exposed pipes, no dishwasher, threadbare rug on the floor, and 2 ratty pull-out sofas instead of a bed. One room had replaced 2, and the walls were brick instead of sheetrock, but Aaron's scent clung to every surface. I stood in the middle of the 20-foot by 20-foot room and closed my eyes. Remembering then was better than now. Then I had the promise of something new. Now the invitation from the keeper of the bloodlines kept my coat too stiff on my left side, desperate for my attention, but I ignored it. 39 years ago, in the summer of '86, I was bored. We're still narrative, but there's a comparison and contrast between the apartment 39 years ago and where we are currently. Now we're in Monroe. That has been established. And we still have the same inciting incident, the keeper of the bloodlines. What ended up being added here also was a little bit of dialogue, but there's still no action. So he's still just standing there in the middle of the floor thinking this whole entire time and explaining his life and all that sort of jazz. That doesn't quite work. Now, action doesn't have to be running away from an exploding building or a car chase. Action is drinking coffee, taking a shower, and in this case, picking up dirty laundry. It had been 39 years since my brother and I shared a space. Then he lived in a fancy apartment with modern appliances. Now he lived in a flat above the bookstore in Monroe, and the building was 400 years old if it was a day. Exposed pipes, no dishwasher, threadbare rug on the floor, and 2 ratty pull-out sofas instead of a bed. One room had replaced 2, and the walls were brick instead of sheetrock, but Aaron's scent clung to the air with teeth, claws, and body odor. I bent down, I misspelled bent, to remove a dirty towel from the floor. I held it up, watching the room through the holes. I shook my head over the tag. We'd bought this towel and other things the last time we lived together. That had been a fun trip. Remembering then was better than now. Then I had the promise of something new. Now the invitation from the keeper of the bloodlines kept my coat too stiff on my left side, desperate for my attention, but I ignored it. 39 years ago, in the summer of '86, I was bored. So now, with that towel, I have given a connection to 39 years ago, why he's thinking about that. But also he's picking up dirty clothes. And it sort of ties things together a little bit. And I go through and add that into the narrative and come up with 2 or 3 things that he's doing. And also, I made that a part of the dialogue for when Aaron actually shows up with food. So you have a little dialogue at the bottom and making fun of each other. There was something else I had to add in here too, because there's a mention of ties and dresses. And since my MC is very old, he would not have worn ties in the 16, 17, or 1800s. He'd have worn a cravat or a jabot. So I had to look that up, and just to make sure, and what kind of material it was made out of. But that didn't take more than one sentence, changing the word, making sure that it fit together. But in the end, I have gone from 600 words to 1,087 words by adding in picking up that towel and looking through it. And then there was pinching underwear up and making a face at it. Action. Grabbing pants hung on the doorknob to the bathroom. Action. He's still thinking. He's complaining about his brother in his head, not saying it out loud. And then when Aaron finally shows up, they have a little bit of dialogue, but it's enough dialogue. Kind of goes like this. Metal clicked and the bolt slid home, dragging me back to the present again. I tossed it, this was a t-shirt, towards the basket. Hinges whined as the door opened and Aaron entered, the aroma of burgers causing me to groan. Airball, Aaron laughed. You still suck at basketball. And you still can't work a stove. I told you I'd cook, brother. Aaron laughed as he kicked the door closed. And tonight you getting settled in, so supper is my treat. I followed him to the table and took the drink so that he could set the paper bag on the wood. The odor of grease assailed me and I smiled to hide gritting my teeth. Aaron studied my face and laughed. Tomorrow you can make me breakfast. Not all of us have a dragon chef, Jonah. Some of us live like real people. The mention of my cook sent me back to the summer of '86 and the reason I needed her. Being here was a mistake, but I couldn't ignore the invitation to the Christmas ball, not if I wanted to remain breathing. The added little bit of the air ball and is sort of a smooth transition with the dialogue, a little banter with the brothers. Yeah, they're old, but they still live in the modern times and they make fun of each other. And then at the very end, I brought it right back around to the Christmas ball. Does this need editing? Yes. What am I doing now is what I call fleshing it out, adding the little action beats into the narrative and the little bit of dialogue to make it flow more smoothly. At one point, I had to look up whether or not cravats and jabot could be made from the same material as a dress, because that's something in there that's mentioned too. So I had to stop and look that up and then make changes to the section that it was in. So anyway, this is just a bit of my editing process and what I've been doing for the last 3 days. But I'm getting into Jonah's head. I'm getting into Jonah's head. And this is how I work that out and make it smooth as I possibly can. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So remember the 3 things that you need to pay attention to when you're writing a scene is your narrative and your action. And remember, you don't have to explode a building, car chase, nothing so dramatic, sword fight. It's not really necessary. You just have to have the characters moving through the scene. And remember to have your dialogue in there and make it natural, make it flow. And yeah, that's it.